Distribution and consumption of goods and services, basically the system on which a country's economy runs. Now there are three different types: market, command, and mixed. Let's see these one by one. Now, mixed we'll discuss in the end. First is the command economy. Is it visible? Okay. Now, command economy, government owns most or all resources. What did I do?
Restart.
Restart? Okay. Owns or controls most of the resources. Then you have bias towards large-scale capital-intensive production. What is large-scale capital-intensive production? Can you give example? Large scale is simple. What is capital-intensive production?
Massive production.
What is capital? Let's break it down. Human capital is the most useless capital. I mean, economics, when we say capital,
It's money.
money is capital, but
Resources.
Assets.
infrastructure, here it's, now all of you are correct, money, human resources, all of these are capital. But here we are talking about infrastructure. Okay? So, governments in this developing countries where you have command economies, they tend to spend their money on or try to promote capital intensive, where you require a lot of infrastructure, manufacturing, like for example, steel, cement, okay, iron production, these kind of industries, automobile, possibly, and mining. They invest their money in large scale intensive, capital intensive, because these things require a lot of capital. It's not like your startup that you can start in your garage. Government likes these kind of things. Now, it also applies the visible hand of the state, central planning and collectivism. So, government tries to control production, prices. This has reduced a lot, 2-3 years ago. So much of flying that was very difficult to teach. Anyway. So applies the visible hand of the state, that is that it interferes with all kinds of economic activity, and there is central planning. The government plans, like in India we have the 5-year plan. So the government plans what they are going to do with the economy in the coming time, short term and long term, what kind of industries will be encouraged, what kind of industries will be discouraged, and all that. And the philosophical anchor is communism. Okay. What is communism? Apart from what you have seen in Hollywood movies.
Ideology that centralized on everything controlled by the government.
Communism, its ideal is a stateless economy, okay, stateless country, where you do not have any kind of discrimination of any kind, but that usually doesn't happen. So you want to distribute all economic benefits to everybody. It's not, you want to reduce economic disparity and achieve equality for everyone. Now, does it work? No. Because no matter how much the idea sounds good, it doesn't work because people do not like equality. So, communism doesn't work. Countries that had communism had to shift to controlled communism or controlled capitalism actually. Like China is communist by flag. It has a red flag, but that's it. It has a lot of control, but it's basically capitalist in nature now. Now, when we go to market economy, they are mostly private or individual or business ownership of resources. Resources are controlled by private people. Now, bias towards entrepreneurial innovation. That is, industries that require innovation, they are not capital intensive, are promoted. Okay? Like services, knowledge, that is promoted. It applies the invisible hand, meaning that the government does not interfere and let it, the economy runs as it should. Property rights are there, and you have individualism mostly. Philosophical anchor, capitalism. Now, capitalism works very well because, in my opinion, it's very natural. We like inequality, we like having disparity in income and power, and that's what capitalism is. If you do not control it, it leads to a lot of economic divide and poverty. So rich become richer and poor become poorer. Now, to deal with the problems of communism and capitalism, some governments came up with the mixed system. Okay? In mixed system, there is a mixture of government and private ownership of economic resources in varying proportions. Some of the very important industries are run by the government or controlled by the government. Rest is private ownership. When you have, the goal is to balance economic efficiency, but also protect against the excesses of greed and self-interest that we see in capitalism. So you try to let people flourish, at the same time try to make sure that poorer people do not die of hunger, and you try to get them all the social benefits that you can. Philosophical anchor is socialism. Okay? Now, when India started, it started with socialism and then has shifted towards capitalism all along. It has been shifting from 1990s when we had economic openness. Now, most countries in the world are mixed economies. Somewhere, you have little control, and some countries have slightly more control. Fully open market economies are not that common anymore. Of course, US, most of North America and Western Europe is still capitalist, but they have some amount of control now. Fully communist economies are there, like North Korea, but they do not have enough of economic, you can say, prosperity. So communism also doesn't work fully. Has anybody read any literature regarding communism, like books like 1984? No? Okay. Animal Farm?
I've read that. George Orwell.
You have not. Okay. Of course, if you are from China and Vietnam, you won't read it. Okay. Because these books are very against the government, so they may not be even available. I'm not sure. But you should read it to understand, because we understand a lot about capitalism, but very little about communism. So we just know that it's negative, it's bad. But that's not the case. The books I'm telling, they do not paint a very positive picture, but still I'm just telling that you have to understand it by reading, not by what we have seen in the movies. Okay? Any questions or comments?
Sure. I want to ask about why, like IBM or Apple, want to invest their factory in China. So
Because
they already know that China is a collectivism, like they don't important like what what is it, like intellectual property. They don't think it's important. Why they still invest their money to the China?
first thing is that they do not invest a lot of money. It's contractual production. So what they do is that they just give contract to companies to produce their products. They do it because it's cheaper. You can pay almost 1/20th of labor wages in China compared to in the US. It's very cheap.
But why don't India, like India, I think it's equal with China for the labor
Yeah, but
cost.
there was not enough support earlier. Now that is happening, but there was not enough because India doesn't have like a lot of manufacturing facilities there. Even India's own companies have been manufacturing in China. Okay, we had a new startup company called Micromax. Okay. Started as an Indian company, then it had foreign investments and production in China because it's cheaper. And why is it cheaper? Because in China, a lot of times states are trying, different states in China, regions in China, they're trying to outdo each other. They want to show that they're doing better. So industries are heavily subsidized. They can run even at loss because the government is supporting the industries. So in that case, it becomes difficult to compete with these industries in China. So companies go to China because production is very cheap and labor laws are non-existent. People can work for 16 hours, 18 hours, like in Foxconn. The company that produces mainly your iPhone and iPads. Have you heard of Foxconn?
Yeah, there is a branch in Slovakia.
Okay. It's a Taiwanese company, but it has major operations in China. They are also opening a factory in India, and they are pretty evil. In the sense that when you might have heard about suicides, right? So their solution to suicides is just installing nets outside the building. So if people jump, they don't die. Okay. They have pretty strict kind of system in terms of how workers work, and they have like zero interaction with each other. They live in isolation. They have very poor living conditions, very poor working conditions. So that's why in China. You can hide a lot of things and nobody is going to know. Now, have you seen that movie 2012? John Cusack? The world was ending in 2012.
Oh,
That movie?
yeah.
Where there are earthquakes and everything, and finally they go on a ship. Now, where were the ships being built?
China.
There's a reason they showed China, right? Because if it's in China, nobody can know what's going on. You can hide information easily. So that's the major reason why production goes to China. But as production is becoming slightly more expensive in China, companies are shifting to Indonesia, Vietnam, because production is still cheaper there. Few cents only, but for companies that can matter a lot, they care a lot about it. So production is going to shift to other countries from China. Okay, because wages are have increased in China a bit. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
We talked about economic freedom and the standard of living and the aspect of the economic system, right? So, from the perspective of, let's say, a foreign business, if it wants to come to let's say, maybe Taiwan, right? So, if we look at these three things which we have talked about, so the idea is that somehow they affect their decision, right? Like for them to let's say maybe come here. So my question was like, since these factors seem like they will affect all the companies the same, right? Because it's the same type of economic system, so it means it affects you all somehow like the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we talk about consumer standard of living, so kind of like it's the same. And economic freedom, right? So as a company, it's like all of you are going to face the same thing. So
Yes.
my question was like, should it really matter to a company, because it's kind of like a level playing field, right? Like you face the same thing, all of you. So like, should it really matter for a company like to think much about this kind of factors, because you're going to face the same thing, right? With your friends or competitors.
Okay, there are two things in that. First is that, is it profitable to go to a country? Now, everybody is going to lose money, so everybody should not go. Everybody is going to make money, and companies will want to go. But there are differences in companies' resources. Some companies are huge. They have more resources, they can lose more money than others. So, it's not necessary that all companies face the same problems. One company may have better contacts, and that can increase their profitability over other companies. One company may have more infrastructure or other resources, or they are able to make a better deal in terms of buying existing facilities. Other company may have to come up with new infrastructure. So their capabilities also matter in terms of how they can navigate an economy of the country. So it's not the same for every company. But if two companies are very similar, they are going to have the same problem. But then again, it depends on each company's, you can say, how consumers treat them. Because consumers do not see companies in the same light. Okay? And Taiwan is not a very good place for investment. See, political freedom is there, culturally, maybe you can understand it. It has like good legal and political situation, but it doesn't have demand. China has poor political situation in terms of political risk. It has a lot of cultural issues. It has very low economic freedom. Still, companies go there because they make more money there. There's demand. So companies would adjust. They would see how much threat they have and how much opportunity they have. Okay? Plus, some companies are favored because of their origin. Maybe China wants to make a deal with some country, and a company is coming from there, they may give it preferential treatment over others. So that's another situation. Plus, also depends on how much you can bribe people. How willing you are to bribe officials. All companies are not the same. Okay? Moving on, we have, as we already discussed, market economy, individuals makes most decisions, government just sees from the sideline. Command economy, government controls most of the things, even determines prices. Mixed economy, we already discussed. Now, another issue that we have is state capitalism. State capitalism is basically state-controlled capitalism. That's what is working right now. That is, system in which the government explicitly manipulates market outcomes for political purposes. Example, you can promote certain industries to encourage economic development, depending on the requirement. You can develop national companies into global leaders. You can restrict foreign companies from entering strategic industries. Okay? This is pretty common. I mean, governments like control FDI, not allow FDI full or partial in many sectors. Like if you want to invest in defense, you cannot in some countries. Like let's say if you're in the US, you're in France, you're in Canada, most European countries, you want to make missiles, fine, do it. Okay? The government will control you, to whom you can sell and how you do it. The contract involves the government. You cannot just sell missile to anybody. But in India, if a company wants to come and open, for example, or even in Taiwan, in China, privately owned companies making defense equipment, not allowed. Okay. The government heavily controls these things. So, or as you can see and see in the example of China, that companies have been developed to become global leaders. Like China was facing problem accessing the world market in photoelectric equipment. Basically making the equipment for harnessing sun's energy, light. So they had a problem with that. They did not have their local industry, the world industry in other countries were not very accessible and expensive. So China started investing in that, and they developed an industry which is a global leader now. That's much more powerful than other countries and much bigger than other countries. So that's one example of state capitalism, where you have capitalism because capitalism is required for economic growth, but you control it by manipulating it as required. Any comments here? Okay, economic development, depending on what is the situation in the world today. Developing countries are largest in number and have very low per capita income. Emerging economies are fast growing and relatively prosperous now. That's BRICS. Now, South Africa was added in this, but I don't know what's going on now. South Africa is nowhere there anymore. Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Now, in terms of developed countries, you have high per capita income and standard of living. US, Japan, France, Australia are some of the examples. Okay, so that's where you are. Now, in emerging economies, you have there are some economies which are in between. Like they're not in developing, they're not yet emerging. Okay, these economies include like Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand. These countries are not as big as the emerging economies, but they are not developing either. Developing economies mostly are concentrated in the African continent right now. In this entire region, this area, most countries have passed that phase, and they are just one stage behind the emerging economies. What about Taiwan? Where does it fall?
Developed countries.
What about not only Taiwan, what about Taiwan, South Korea? Even South Korea, where are they? They're somewhere here, in between. Okay? Per capita income, according to per capita income, they are developed economies. But other indices, if you check other indices like life expectancy, quality of life, it's not yet developed, this region. Okay? It's somewhere like just almost there. Okay, so economics. What is GNI? That's the broadest measure of economic activity. If you measure the GNI of each country in the world, GNI, they are equal. Okay. Now, what is GDP? Sorry, GNP? Total value of all final goods and services produced within a nation in a particular year. GDP is total market value of all goods and services produced by workers and capital within a nation's border. What is the difference between the two?
I think between GNP and GDP, right?
Yes.
For GDP, let's say if it's in country like let's say Taiwan, right? Companies, foreign companies which are also doing their business here, their transactions will be counted in GDP. But for GNP, usually they are excluded. It's like for nationals of a country. Yeah, and sometimes it includes those living abroad, if it's possible.
Yeah, that's the difference, that in one you account for the payments that you get from outside and minus the payments that you pay. In another one, you don't. Okay? My problem is that I can't tell the difference, from which one you count and which one you do not count. I get confused all the time. Now, it doesn't matter. For you, you do not have to worry about how GDP or GNP is calculated. You have to worry about what are the implications. And the implications depend on GNI, not exactly GDP and GNP. Because these numbers are manipulated by the government a lot. GNI is less manipulated, but this is manipulated by the government a lot in terms of how they calculate it. So let's forget about that and concentrate on GNI. So it includes everything, GNI includes all the industries, indices, all the production inside, outside. So let's count on that. Now, GNI data alone doesn't give you a good picture. GNI data alone is very misleading because it just counts all the production and the market value of all the goods and services in a country in a year. So, I'm on the wrong side. So, GNI itself doesn't give you the correct picture because it doesn't account for what's going on in the country. It doesn't account for the growth rate of the economy. So having a high GNI does not mean that your economy is doing well. For example, GNI of US is very high, but their growth rate is around 2%. That's not bad for a developed economy, but I'm just saying that it's only 2%. GNI of China is lower. Or it's the opposite now, I get confused. Let's say the GNI of Taiwan is lower, but their growth rate is higher. So when you're trying to understand the health of the economy, you have to see how fast it is growing to understand if there is potential in that country or not. Second is the number of people. GNI is high, check GNI per capita to understand if people really have money or not. Then the local cost of living, that's purchasing power parity. Just for that to see if even if people have low income, do they have more within that low income or not? So you have to adjust GNI data to get a clear picture. Now what happens is that the governments, when they're trying to fool people, they say, oh, we have very high GNI, very good economy is doing, but they do not adjust for these things. And then we think that, okay, yes, things are good. But that doesn't happen. So don't get misled. Check for yourself, you will understand more. Now this is GNI data for some countries. You can see this is for 2011, it's old data. You can check, it's almost the same, not much has changed I think. Because then if you want, you can check the current GNI rankings. US is number 1, China, Japan, Germany, these are the usual countries there. UK, Italy, Brazil, India, Canada, and the world. That's the average here. That was the situation earlier. Now what's the GNI ranking? Let's see. This is GNI per capita, that will give a different picture, but let's see. If you adjust for per capita, then things change a lot. Let's see GNI without per capita. Where is the list? They want money? If it's not the list. Hold on, let me check if we can find immediately. This is again per capita and purchasing Atlas method. The one that we have is Atlas. Yes. It's slightly different. I'll find the correct one and show it to you next week. Okay?
You can check it from the website of World Bank, Professor.
World Bank website is there.
The
This
second
one?
The second one. Below. Yes. Click the
Yes.
most recent value. Most recent value. Click again. Click again, Professor.
Click again.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the opposite. Yeah. This is a clearer picture. Okay. US, China, Japan, Germany, France, UK, same. Like 2011, right? Same countries on top. Then you have here India in top 10, initially Brazil, Canada. It's not different. So basically nothing has changed. So this is the situation. Now, oh, I have to change the slide. Any questions here? So this is the size, I mean, it's 15,000 billion, it's in US dollars and billions, right? No questions? That's the total, not income basically, it's the value of all the goods and services produced in the country. Calculating all the payments and incomes from outside as well. Yes. Canada doesn't do much, they have a big country, very few people. That's why they have they do not have very high GNI. They have low growth. It's a developed country, but it's all, I mean, they don't have a lot of production. And plus it's too cold.
And China is not like, for example, China is having like low wage, but it's just a second place.
That's because they have very high production. See, it doesn't depend on wage. It depends on the value of goods produced.